"Please help, she's starving," the Comanche warrior begged, and Louise Carter held the crying infant tight against her chest while the entire trading post fell silent, every eye turning toward the scarred woman who never spoke to anyone, toward the desperate father who had walked into enemy territory with nothing but hope and a dying child. The morning had started like any other at Fort Griffin's trading post, with Louise arranging her handmade leather goods on the worn wooden counter, her scarred hands moving with practiced efficiency as she avoided the stares that always came. The thick burn scars running from her left cheek down her neck and disappearing beneath her collar told a story she never spoke aloud. 5 months ago, her cabin had burned with her husband and infant son inside. She'd run into the flames trying to save them. The scars were all she carried out. The scars and a guilt so heavy she could barely breathe under its weight. The other traders kept their distance as always, setting up their tables of flour, tobacco, and tools without speaking to her, without acknowledging her existence beyond the occasional whispered comment they pretended she couldn't hear. She was the ghost woman they whispered about. The one whose family died because she'd been at the creek fetching water instead of home where she belonged. The town had decided her survival was suspicious, perhaps even sinful, and so they'd made her invisible, a living ghost haunting the edges of their righteous community. Louise had learned to exist in the spaces between people. She worked leather because her father had taught her before he died, because her hands still remembered the craft, even when her heart had forgotten how to feel anything but grief. She sold enough belt straps and saddlebags to pay for her tiny room above the blacksmith's shop and to buy the bread nobody would break with her. The coins she earned were cold and silent, just like everything else in her life had become. She'd arrived at the trading post before dawn as usual, when the streets were still dark and empty, when she didn't have to see the way mothers pulled their children close when she passed, didn't have to hear the whispers about how God's judgment had marked her face, about how a good woman would have died with her family instead of living on alone, about how there must have been something wrong with her marriage, something sinful, something that invited divine wrath. The trading post doors burst open with such force that several people jumped. A Comanche warrior stood in the entrance, his chest heaving with exhaustion, his buckskin shirt dark with sweat despite the cool October morning. His long black hair was loose around his shoulders, and his face was gaunt with sleeplessness and desperation. He held a bundle wrapped in rabbit fur, and from that bundle came the weakest cry Louise had ever heard. A baby dying slowly, fading like a candle in the wind. The trading post erupted in hostile whispers. Comanche this close to the fort meant trouble, meant raids, meant danger, meant memories of violence that ran deep in the collective memory of Fort Griffin. 3 men reached for rifles kept beneath their tables, while women pulled their children behind their skirts, while others backed toward the door preparing to run. But the warrior didn't reach for the knife at his belt or the bow across his back. Instead, he fell to his knees right there on the wooden floor, his pride dissolving in the face of his child's need. "Please," he said in broken English, his voice raw with desperation that transcended language. "Baby needs milk. Mother dead 3 days. No woman in tribe can feed her. All the young mothers lost in the fever that swept through last month. The sickness that took so many, my wife included." His name was Pahayuko. Though Louise didn't know that yet, all she saw was a man destroyed by grief, holding a child who would die without help. She saw herself 5 months ago, screaming outside her burning cabin while neighbors stood back and watched. Helpless or unwilling, she'd never been sure which. She saw in his eyes the same desperate bargaining with God that she'd done. The same willingness to trade anything, everything, for just one more moment with the person you loved. "Get that savage out of here," the post-trader shouted from behind his counter, his hand on the shotgun he kept loaded with buckshot. "We don't help Comanche. Not after what they did to the Henderson family last spring. Not after they burned the Miller homestead. Not after everything they've taken from us." The warrior's eyes swept the room, landing on each woman in turn, searching for compassion, for humanity, for anything that might save his daughter from the slow death of starvation. One by one, the women turned away, clutching their own babies closer, their faces hard with old hatreds and fresh fears, with a history of violence that made mercy feel like betrayal. "There's a wet nurse 2 days north in Jacksboro," someone finally said. "Maybe she'll help if you got money, if you can pay proper wages." Pahayuko's face crumpled with anguish. "Baby not live 2 days. She needs milk now, today, this hour." His accent was thick, but his meaning was devastatingly clear. Without help in the next hours, his daughter would die in his arms, and he would have failed her the way he'd failed his wife. A woman near the door laughed, sharp and cruel like broken glass. "Then maybe you shouldn't have brought her here, savage. Maybe your kind should stay in the territories where you belong. Maybe this is God's judgment for all the Christian blood your people have spilled. Maybe your baby dying is justice." The words struck Pahayuko like physical blows. Louise saw him flinch, saw his jaw clench, saw the rage flash in his eyes before grief drowned it again. But he didn't rise, didn't fight, didn't respond to the provocation. He only held his daughter closer and looked around the room one more time, his dark eyes landing on Louise, on the scars that marked her as different as other, as someone who understood what it meant to be cast out by your own people. "You," he said, his voice breaking on the single word. "You lost child too. I see it in your eyes. I see the mother grief. Please, I beg you." The room went completely silent, the kind of silence that feels like pressure in your ears. Like the moment before thunder, every eye turned to Louise, boring into her with expectation and judgment. She stood frozen behind her table of leather goods, her scarred hands gripping the edge hard enough to make her knuckles white, hard enough to make the old burns ache. The baby's cry had faded to almost nothing, a sound like a kitten drowning, like hope dying. "Don't even think about it." The post-trader warned Louise, his voice cold and final. "You help that Comanche, and you'll never sell another thing in this post. This town's already got questions about you. About that fire, about why you lived when your family died. Don't give them more reason to talk. Don't give them cause to drive you out completely." Louise looked at the dying baby, at the desperate father, at the room full of people who had let her own family burn in rumor and suspicion while they stood safely distant. She thought about her son Samuel, about how he'd looked the one time she'd held him before. The fever took him 2 days after birth. About his perfect tiny fingers and the way he'd never opened his eyes. About how she'd had milk her baby never drank. Milk that had leaked through her bindings for weeks while she sobbed in her empty cabin. Her body had continued producing milk for weeks after the fire. A cruel joke from a merciless God, a daily reminder of what she'd lost. She'd bound her breasts tight and endured the pain until finally her body understood what her heart already knew. Her child was gone, but it had only been 5 months. Sometimes she still woke in the night, leaking and aching, her body remembering what her mind tried so hard to forget. "I'll try," Louise heard herself say, the words coming from somewhere deep and broken inside her, from a place that grief had hollowed out and left echoing. "Bring her to me." The room exploded in outrage, women gasping and clutching their crosses, men cursing and spitting. The post-trader slamming his hand on the counter so hard that coins jumped and scattered. But Louise didn't look at any of them. She only watched as Pahayuko rose to his feet, his face transforming with desperate hope. With the first light she'd seen there, he crossed the room in 4 long strides, his moccasins silent on the wood floor despite his size. Up close, Louise could see he was younger than she'd first thought. Maybe 25, with a strong jaw and eyes that held a grief as deep as her own. Grief that recognized grief. He held out the bundle with shaking hands. With a father's terror and trust, Louise took the baby carefully, pulling back the rabbit fur to reveal a tiny face. Grey-tinged and slack, the infant was perhaps 3 weeks old, her breathing so shallow that Louise had to watch carefully to see her chest move at all. She was beautiful and dying, her little fists curled tight, her body fighting a battle she was slowly losing. "You're making a mistake," a woman hissed from across the room, her face twisted with righteous anger, helping savages living alone. "Something's not right about you, Louise Carter. Something's been not right since that fire. Since you walked out alive and they didn't. Louise finally looked up, meeting the woman's eyes directly for the first time in months. My room is above the blacksmith shop 2 streets over, she said to Pahayuko, ignoring everyone else in the room, ignoring their judgment and their hate. Come there in 1 hour, I'll try to help your daughter. The post-trader stepped out from behind his counter, his face red with rage, his shotgun now visible in his hands. You bring that Comanche to town and there'll be trouble. Real trouble. The sheriff won't stand for it. The militia won't stand for it. People will remember this, Louise. They'll remember you chose them over us. Then tell the sheriff to come arrest me, Louise said quietly, her voice steady despite the fear rising in her chest. But this baby needs help now, not after we've debated the politics of mercy. She walked toward the door, still holding the infant. Pahayuko followed close behind her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. As they passed through the trading post doors into the bright morning sunlight, Louise heard the whispers explode behind them like gunfire, like the sound her cabin had made when the roof collapsed. She's lost her mind. Grief drove her crazy. Helping a Comanche warrior, probably planning to run off with him, living with him probably. Just like those stories you hear about white women who go savage, who forget their people and their God. She probably started that fire herself, killed her own family. Now she's taking up with Indians, proving what we suspected all along. Louise's hands tightened on the baby, but she didn't stop walking. Didn't turn around to defend herself, didn't waste breath on people who had already convicted her. Pahayuko stayed 3 paces behind her, clearly aware that walking beside a white woman would cause even more trouble, would give the town more ammunition for their hatred. They moved through Fort Griffin's dusty streets as morning activities ground to a halt. Shopkeepers stopped sweeping. Women stopped hanging laundry. Children stopped playing. Everyone stared with open mouths and hostile eyes. The blacksmith was working his forge when they arrived. The ring of his hammer on hot iron stopped abruptly when he saw Louise with the Comanche warrior behind her. His eyes went wide with shock, then narrow with suspicion and something else. Something that might have been concern or might have been calculation. Miss Carter, what in God's name are you doing? He said, setting down his hammer but keeping it close. Within reach, saving a life, Louise interrupted, climbing the exterior stairs to her room above the shop, her legs shaking but her voice firm. If the sheriff has questions, he knows where to find me. Her room was tiny, barely large enough for a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single chair by the small window, but it was clean and quiet and private. The only place in Fort Griffin that felt like it belonged to her. Louise laid the baby on her bed and turned to Pahayuko, who stood uncertainly in the doorway. Too large for the small space, too aware of the impropriety of entering a white woman's bedroom. Come in, she said. Close the door, people are already talking. We might as well give the baby what she needs in private. He obeyed, his size making the small room feel even smaller. He moved with the careful grace of a man trained to fight, but trying hard not to frighten. His eyes never left his daughter, watching every breath, counting every heartbeat. I don't know if this will work, Louise said, unbuttoning the high collar of her dress with scarred fingers that trembled slightly. It's been 5 months since I had milk. My body might not remember how, might have forgotten what my heart wishes it could. Try, Pahayuko said simply, his voice rough with emotion barely contained. Please try, it is all I ask, all I have left to ask. Louise sat in the chair and picked up the baby, loosening her dress enough to bring the infant to her breast. At first, nothing happened. The baby's mouth moved weakly against her skin, but couldn't latch, couldn't suck, couldn't remember what to do. Louise felt panic rising in her chest, felt the familiar weight of failure pressing down. Come on, she whispered, her own tears starting to fall hot and fast. Please, little one, please try. Fight just a little bit longer. Pahayuko dropped to his knees beside the chair, his hand hovering near his daughter but not touching, not interfering, not willing to disturb whatever fragile magic might be happening. Louise could hear his breathing, ragged and desperate, could feel his hope and fear filling the small room like smoke, like prayer. Then, like a miracle, Like an answer to a prayer Louise hadn't known she was praying. She felt the familiar letdown sensation, her body remembering what her heart had tried so hard to forget. Milk came, not much at first, just a few drops, but enough to give the baby something to taste, something to fight for. The baby latched suddenly, her tiny mouth working with new strength, with the fierce determination of life fighting against death, and she began to drink. Louise gasped at the sensation, at the rightness of it, at the way her body had kept this gift waiting for 5 months just for this moment, just for this child who was not hers but needed her anyway. Pahayuko made a sound, half sob, half prayer, words in Comanche that Louise didn't understand but felt in her bones. His forehead pressed against the chair arm, his shoulders shaking with relief so profound it looked like pain. "She drinks," he breathed in English. "Oh, spirits, oh God, she drinks." They stayed like that for a long time, the Comanche warrior on his knees, the scarred white woman in her chair, and between them a baby fighting her way back from death's door, one swallow at a time. Outside, Louise could hear voices gathering, angry and accusing, the town learning what she'd done and deciding what it meant. Deciding what punishment fit her crime of mercy. "She'll need to eat every few hours," Louise said quietly after the baby had finally fallen asleep at her breast, her tiny belly full for the first time in days. Pahayuko looked up from where he knelt beside the chair, his face still wet with tears he hadn't bothered to wipe away. His daughter's color had already changed from gray to pale pink, her breathing deeper and more regular. "I bring her back," Pahayuko said immediately, rising to his feet with his sleeping daughter cradled against his chest. "I come when sun is high, then again when it sets." "No," Louise surprised herself by saying, her mind working through the implications even as her heart urged caution. "The town is already gathering outside. I can hear them. If you keep coming here in daylight, they'll cause real trouble. The kind that ends in violence." She stood and moved to the small window, carefully staying to the side so she wouldn't be seen from below. At least 20 people had gathered in the street, their faces turned up toward her room, their voices a low, angry rumble, like distant thunder promising a storm. She recognized the post-trader, the preacher's wife, several ranch hands who were always looking for an excuse to fight. The blacksmith had abandoned his forge and stood with his arms crossed, watching his own building like it had betrayed him. "They wait for me to leave," Pahayuko said, coming to stand behind her. "Far enough back to remain hidden from view. They will follow me, maybe attack. They want excuse to spill Comanche blood." Louise turned to face him, studying his exhausted features in the dim light of her small room. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days, whose world had collapsed around him and left him standing in the ruins, trying to save the one thing that mattered. She knew that look because she'd seen it in her own mirror every morning since the fire. "Stay here," she said, the words coming out before she could think them through. "Stay until your daughter is stronger, until we figure out something safer." Pahayuko's eyes widened with shock. "You would let me stay, a Comanche warrior in your home, knowing what your people will say, what they will do to you?" "They've already decided what I am," Louise said quietly, touching the scars on her face with one hand. A woman marked by God's judgment, a wife who failed her husband, a mother who let her baby die. What's one more sin added to the list they keep? She moved to her small trunk at the foot of the bed and pulled out a worn quilt. "You can sleep on the floor by the door. I'll bar it from inside so no one can enter without warning. There's a chamber pot under the bed and a water pitcher on the washstand. It's not much, but it's safe." Pahayuko looked at her for a long moment, his dark eyes searching her scarred face as if trying to understand what kind of woman would risk everything for strangers, for enemies. "My name is Pahayuko," he said finally, his voice formal and careful. "My daughter is called Kimimela. It means butterfly. My wife named her before she died, said she was small and beautiful and would need to be strong to survive this hard world." "Louise," she replied, "Louise Carter. My son was Samuel. He lived 2 days before fever took him. I never got to feed him. My milk came after he was gone." The silence that followed was heavy with shared grief. with an understanding that went deeper than words or culture, or the hatred that separated their peoples. They were two parents who had lost everything, standing in a small room above a blacksmith shop while an angry mob gathered below. Someone pounded on the door hard enough to rattle the frame. Louise jumped, but Pahayuko moved with fluid grace to stand between her and the door, his hand dropping to the knife at his belt, his body tensing for a fight. "Miss Carter," the sheriff's voice came through the wood. "Rough and impatient, open this door right now." Louise took a breath to steady herself and walked to the door. She slid back the bolt, but kept the door mostly closed, only opening it a crack. Sheriff Morrison stood on the narrow landing, his hat pushed back and his face red with heat and anger. Behind him she could see two deputies and the post trader, all armed, all hostile. "What's going on here, Louise?" the sheriff demanded. "People are saying you brought a Comanche into town. Into your room, that true. I'm helping a dying baby," Louise said, keeping her voice calm and level. "Her father needed someone who could nurse her. I can, so I am." "You can't just bring Indians into Fort Griffin," the sheriff said, his hand resting on his gun belt. "We got rules. We got ordinances. We got people who lost family to Comanche raids. You're stirring up trouble." "A baby is not a raid," Louise replied. "She's 3 weeks old and starving. I'm feeding her. That's not against any law I know." The post-trader pushed forward, his face twisted with rage. "It's indecent," he spat. "A woman alone with a savage man in her bedroom doing God knows what. It's unnatural, it's wrong, it's probably illegal." "We're saving a child's life," Louise said, her hand tightening on the door. "That's all that's happening here. If you want to make something ugly out of Mercy, then that says more about you than about me." "Let me see him," Sheriff Morrison said, stepping closer. "Let me see this Comanche warrior you're hiding." "No," Louise said firmly, "you're not coming in here. You have no warrant, no cause, no right. I'm feeding a baby and then he's leaving. That's all you need to know." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "You're making this harder than it needs to be, Louise. People are angry. They're scared. They see a Comanche this close to town, and they remember bad things. I'm trying to keep the peace here, then keep them away from my door," Louise said. "I'll send him out after dark when the streets are empty. He'll go back to his people and this will be done." "And the baby?" one of the deputies asked. "What about her?" "She'll eat again before he leaves," Louise said. "And then it's in God's hands." "Same as it always was." The sheriff studied her face for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally he nodded. "You got until nightfall. After that, if he's still here, I'll have to take action." "Understand?" "I understand," Louise said, and closed the door in their faces. She heard them arguing on the landing, heard the post-trader's voice rising in anger, heard the sheriff telling everyone to go home and let him handle it, heard boots on the stairs, and the crowd below reluctantly dispersing. But she knew they hadn't gone far. They were waiting, watching, hoping for an excuse. "That was brave," Pahayuko said quietly from where he stood by the window. "Or foolish, I'm not certain which." "Both probably," Louise admitted, sitting heavily in her chair, her legs suddenly weak with reaction. "I've never stood up to the sheriff before, never challenged anyone. I've spent 5 months trying to be invisible." "You are not invisible now," Pahayuko observed, his tone almost amused despite their situation. "Now everyone sees you." Louise looked at the sleeping baby in his arms, at the way Kimimela's tiny hand curled around her father's finger, at the rise and fall of her small chest. "Yes," she said softly, "I suppose they do." The afternoon stretched long and tense. Louise fed Kimimela twice more, each time feeling her milk come stronger. Her body remembering its purpose. Between feedings, Pahayuko told her about his wife in halting English, about how they'd met during a trading visit, about how she'd laughed at his poor attempts to make her notice him, about how she'd died calling his name while he held her hand and begged her to stay. "The fever came to our camp like a curse," he said, staring out the window at the sky turning orange with sunset. "It took the old ones first, then the children, then the women who were weak from birthing. My wife, she fought for 3 days. She made me promise to save Kimimela no matter what, to find help even if it meant coming to the white settlements, even if it meant begging. You kept your promise," Louise said. "That takes more courage than pride." Pride is luxury for men who have not watched their wife die. Pahayuko replied, his voice flat with exhausted grief. I would crawl on my belly to your fort if it saved my daughter. I would endure any shame, any hatred. Louise understood that completely. She would have done anything to save Samuel, would have traded her life for his without hesitation, would have borne any pain, any judgment, but God or fate or whatever cruel force governed the world had not given her that choice. As darkness finally fell, Louise prepared for Pahayuko's departure. She fed Kimimela one more time, the baby now drinking with real strength, her eyes occasionally fluttering open to reveal dark pupils that seemed to focus on Louise's scarred face without fear or judgment. Come back tomorrow night, Louise said, as Pahayuko wrapped his daughter carefully in the rabbit fur. Same time, use the back stairs so fewer people see you. I'll keep feeding her until she's strong enough to survive on water and soft food. How long? Pahayuko asked, his eyes meeting hers in the lamplight. 2 weeks maybe, Louise said, maybe 3. I don't know exactly, I've never done this before. 2 weeks, Pahayuko repeated, his jaw tightening. 2 weeks I must leave her and return. 2 weeks I must trust a white woman I do not know, with the only family I have left. The words stung, but Louise understood them. Yes, she said simply, you must. Pahayuko studied her face again. That searching look that seemed to see past her scars to something deeper. Finally he nodded, I will trust you, Louise Carter. Because you have mother's eyes, because you hold my daughter like she is precious. Because when you could have turned away like all the others, you did not. He moved to the door, listened carefully for sounds outside, then turned back one more time. If they hurt you because of this, if your people punish you for showing mercy, come to the creek where the 3 cottonwoods stand. Leave a white cloth tied to the middle tree. I will see it and come for you. I'll be fine, Louise said. Though she wasn't certain that was true, Pahayuko slipped out into the darkness, moving like a shadow down the back stairs. Louise watched from her window as he disappeared into the night, carrying his daughter toward whatever camp he'd made outside of town. She felt suddenly, achingly alone. The knock came an hour later, not on her door, but on the blacksmith's shop below. She heard angry voices, heard the blacksmith protesting, heard boots on the stairs, heavy and numerous. Louise barely had time to stand before her door crashed open. The bolt ripping from the frame, 5 men pushed into her small room. Ranch hands she recognized from the saloon, all drunk, all hostile. The blacksmith stood behind them, looking apologetic and frightened. Said they'd burn my shop if I didn't let them up. He stammered. Said they just wanted to talk to you. Where is he? The largest man demanded. Where's your Comanche lover? He's gone, Louise said. Backing toward the window, he left an hour ago. Liar, another man spat. You're hiding him. Probably under that bed. Probably been doing ungodly things with him all day. Get out of my room, Louise said, her voice shaking but firm. You have no right to be here. We got every right. The large man said, stepping closer. This is a Christian town. We don't allow white women to fornicate with savages. We don't allow Indian lovers to live among decent folk. I was feeding a baby, Louise shouted. That's all. Just feeding a starving baby. Sure you were, one of the men laughed. A cold, ugly sound, that's what they all say. Right before they run off to live in teepees, right before they betray their own kind, the large man grabbed Louise's arm, his grip brutal, his breath reeking of whiskey. Maybe we should teach you what happens to women who forget which side they're on, he said, his free hand reaching for her dress. Louise screamed and drove her knee upward with all her strength, catching him in the groin. He howled and released her, stumbling backward. She ran for the door, but another man caught her, threw her against the wall hard enough to make her vision blur. Hold her down, someone said. Let's show her what white men do to traitors. Then the window shattered inward, and Pahayuko came through it like a demon from hell, glass flying everywhere, his knife already drawn. He'd never left, she realized. He'd been watching from the roof, waiting to make sure she was safe. He moved with terrifying speed and precision, his knife slashing across the arm of the man holding Louise, opening a long red line that sprayed blood. The man screamed and fell back. Pahayuko kicked another man in the chest, sending him crashing into the washstand, grabbed a third by the throat and slammed him against the doorframe. "Touch her again and I kill you all." Pahayuko snarled in clear English, better than he'd spoken before, as if rage had burned away the hesitation. "I kill you slow, like you deserve." The ranch hands scrambled toward the door, dragging their wounded companion. The large man pointed at Pahayuko with a shaking hand. "You're dead, savage, you and your Indian-loving whore both. Dead." They fled down the stairs, their boots thundering, their voices already spreading the alarm. "Comanche in town, Comanche attacking white men. Arm yourselves, call the militia." Pahayuko turned to Louise. Blood on his knife, fury in his eyes. "You are hurt," he said, his voice dropping back to gentleness. "I'm fine," Louise managed, though her back ached from hitting the wall and her arm throbbed where the man had grabbed her. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." "You are not fine," Pahayuko said, coming closer to examine her face. "Checking for injuries. They would have hurt you badly. They would have done terrible things, but they didn't," Louise said. "Because you stayed, because you came back." "Of course I came back," Pahayuko said simply, as if there had been no other option. "You protect my daughter. I protect you. This is balance, this is right." Outside the alarm was spreading, bells ringing, men shouting, the sound of horses and guns being loaded. Louise looked at Pahayuko, at the blood on his hands, at the broken window and the shattered door. "You have to go now," she said urgently. "They'll come with guns, with numbers, they'll kill you." "And you," Pahayuko said, "what will they do to you when I am gone?" Louise didn't answer because they both knew. The town had been looking for an excuse to drive her out. To punish her, now they had one. She'd brought a Comanche into Fort Griffin. He'd attacked white men in her defense. She was complicit. She was guilty. She was finished. "Come with me," Pahayuko said, taking her hand. His decision made in an instant. "Come now, my camp is half-day's ride. You will be safe there. I can't just leave." Louise protested. "My things, my life." "Your life is over here," Pahayuko said bluntly. "You know this is true. They will hurt you or jail you or worse. Come with me, feed my daughter, let me repay the mercy you showed. Let me give you the protection you gave Kimimela." Louise looked around her small room, at the few possessions she owned, at the life she'd built from ashes and grief. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Leaving meant abandoning everything, meant confirming what the town already believed about her, meant crossing a line she could never uncross. The sound of boots on the stairs decided for her, at least a dozen men coming fast and angry. Louise grabbed her mother's Bible from beside her bed, and the small leather pouch that held her father's wedding ring, and Samuel's baby blanket, everything else she left behind. Pahayuko lifted her onto the roof, through the broken window, then followed. They ran across the shingled surface, while below men burst into her room. Ran across 2 more roofs, while the alarm spread through Fort Griffin. Climbed down behind the livery stable where Pahayuko had hidden his horse. He lifted Louise onto the horse's back and swung up behind her, his arm tight around her waist, his daughter bundled between them. Then they rode into the darkness, while behind them the town burned with rage and righteousness. While the life Louise had known ended in fire and judgment for the second time, the prairie stretched endless and black before them, the horses' hooves drumming a rhythm that sounded like heartbeats or war drums, or the pulse of a future Louise couldn't imagine. She was running away with a Comanche warrior, fleeing into the night with his baby daughter pressed against her chest, still damp from nursing. She was confirming every terrible thing Fort Griffin had said about her, or maybe, she thought as the cool night air rushed past and Pahayuko's arm held her steady, maybe she was finally choosing life over death, hope over grief, mercy over hate. Maybe for the first time since the fire she was saving herself. Dawn broke cold and pink over the Comanche camp, and Louise woke to the sound of voices speaking a language she didn't understand. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then memory crashed back, and she sat up too quickly, her head spinning from exhaustion and fear. Easy. A woman's voice said in accented English, "You are safe here. No one will harm you." Louise focused on the speaker. An older Comanche woman with silver streaking her black braids, her face weathered and kind. She sat near a small fire outside the hide lodge where Louise had slept, stirring something in a clay pot that smelled of sage and meat. "My name is Nadua," the woman continued. "I was taken by Comanche when I was 9 winters old. White like you, now I am more Comanche than the Comanche. I speak your tongue, so you will not feel so alone." "Where's Pahayuko?" Louise asked, her voice rough from sleep. "Where's the baby?" feeding his daughter. Nadua said with a slight smile, "He came to my lodge before sunrise. Asked me to watch you, to help you understand our ways. He worries you will be frightened." Louise looked around the camp properly for the first time. There were perhaps 20 lodges arranged in a loose circle, smoke rising from morning fires, women moving between them carrying water and wood, children playing with dogs, men checking weapons and horses. It looked nothing like the savage encampment she'd been taught to fear. It looked like a community, like people living their lives. "They stare at me," Louise said quietly, noticing how every person who passed glanced at her. Some curious, some hostile, all wary. "You are white woman in Comanche camp." Nadua said matter-of-factly, "Of course they stare. Some lost family to white soldiers, to settlers who take our land. They see your face and remember they're dead." Louise touched her scars self-consciously. "And what do you remember when you see my face?" Nadua studied her for a long moment. "I remember that suffering has no color, that grief speaks all languages, that sometimes the people who look like us are the ones who hurt us most." Pahayuko emerged from a nearby lodge carrying Kimimela. The baby looked even better in the morning light. Her cheeks fuller, her movements stronger. He crossed to where Louise sat and knelt beside her without speaking. Just holding his daughter out in silent question, Louise took Kimimela and brought her to nurse, aware of the eyes watching, of the whispers that followed. But the baby latched immediately and drank with fierce determination. Pahayuko's shoulders relaxed slightly, the tension leaving his face. "The council wishes to speak with you," Nadua said to Pahayuko in English so Louise would understand. "They want to know why you brought a white woman to our camp, why you risk bringing soldiers down on us. I will speak with them." Pahayuko said, his jaw set. "They will understand." "Will they?" Nadua asked gently. "Red Buffalo already speaks against you, says you are foolish. Says this woman will betray us to the Bluecoats. Says you think with your heart instead of your head." "Tutted her. My heart kept my daughter alive," Pahayuko replied, his hand moving to rest briefly on Louise's shoulder. "This woman risked everything to help us when her own people wanted to let Kimimela die. She deserves our protection, not our suspicion." "I agree," Nadua said, "but I am old woman who was once white. My words carry less weight than Red Buffalo's anger." After Kimimela finished nursing and fell asleep, Pahayuko led Louise through the camp toward the center where a large fire burned. Men gathered there, perhaps 15 warriors and elders, their faces hard and measuring as Louise approached. She forced herself to walk with her head up despite her fear, despite knowing these men had every reason to hate someone who looked like her. "This is the white woman," a broad-shouldered warrior said in English, clearly for her benefit. "This is the one you risk our safety for. She is nothing special. Just another settler who will run back to her people first chance she gets. She had chance to call soldiers last night," Pahayuko said calmly. "She did not. She chose to come with me instead of staying with her people who wanted to hurt her." "Because you are using her," another man argued. "You need her milk for your daughter. When the child is weaned, you will send her away." "When my daughter is weaned, I will ask Louise what she wishes to do," Pahayuko replied. "If she wants to leave, I will take her safely away. If she wants to stay, she stays. This is her choice, not mine." The men erupted in angry voices, speaking rapid Comanche that Louise couldn't follow. Nadua moved close to translate in whispers. "They say it is dangerous. They say whites cannot be trusted. They say your presence will bring trouble." One elder raised his hand for silence, his face deeply lined with age and wisdom, his eyes sharp as flint. When the voices died, he spoke in slow, careful English. I'm Tabananica. I lead this band. I have fought white soldiers for 40 winters. I have watched them break every promise, take every hunting ground, kill our buffalo and starve our children. He looked directly at Louise, his gaze piercing. Why should we trust you, white woman? Give me one reason to believe you will not betray us. Louise's mouth went dry, but she forced herself to speak. I have no reason to betray you, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. My own people tried to hurt me last night. 5 men broke into my room. They would have done terrible things if Pahayuko hadn't stopped them. Fort Griffin is not my home anymore. Those are not my people. So you come to us only because you have nowhere else, Tabananica said. This is not loyalty. This is desperation. Yes, Louise agreed, surprising herself with her honesty. It is desperation. I am desperate and alone, and I have nothing left but the milk my body makes for a baby who is not mine. But that doesn't make me a liar. I'm not asking to stay forever. I'm only asking for safety while I help Kimimela survive. The elder's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. You are honest, at least, he said. This is more than most whites offer. You may stay until the baby is weaned, but you will be watched. If you do anything to endanger this camp, if you try to leave to bring soldiers, you will not leave alive. Understand? I understand, Louise said. The council dismissed them, and Pahayuko led Louise back through the camp, his hand at her elbow, steadying and protective. Red Buffalo watched them pass with undisguised hostility, his arms crossed over his scarred chest. That one hates me, Louise observed quietly. Red Buffalo hates everyone, Pahayuko said. He lost his wife and 2 sons to cavalry attack 3 years ago. He sees white face and sees only enemies. Can you blame him? Louise asked. No, Pahayuko admitted, I cannot. Just as I cannot blame you for being white any more than you can blame me for being Comanche. We are what we are. We carry our people's sins whether we want to or not. The days that followed fell into a rhythm Louise had never expected. She woke each morning in Nadua's lodge where she'd been given a place to sleep, walked to Pahayuko's lodge to feed Kimimela, spent her days learning how Comanche women worked, how they tanned hides and gathered roots and made pemmican from dried meat and berries. Nadua taught her words in Comanche, simple things at first. Hello and thank you and baby and food. Louise's tongue struggled with the unfamiliar sounds, but Nadua was patient, repeating phrases until Louise could manage rough approximations. The children were fascinated by her scars. They would creep close when they thought she wasn't looking, whispering and pointing. Finally, one brave little girl approached and touched Louise's scarred cheek with gentle fingers, her eyes wide with curiosity, not fear. Fire, Louise said in English, then tried the Comanche word Nadua had taught her. The little girl nodded solemnly and ran back to her friends, chattering in their language. After that, the children seemed to accept her presence. Even if the adults remained wary, Pahayuko spent most of each day hunting or training horses. But every evening, he came to sit by Nadua's fire while Louise nursed Kimimela. He would watch his daughter eat with an expression of such profound gratitude that it made Louise's chest ache. She grows stronger every day, he said one evening after Kimimela had fallen asleep. Her fists no longer look like bird bones. Her cry is loud enough to wake the whole camp. She's a fighter, Louise agreed, adjusting the sleeping baby in her arms. Like her father, like her mother, Pahayuko corrected quietly. My wife was small but fierce. She would have liked you, I think, would have appreciated your courage. I'm not courageous, Louise said. I just didn't have anywhere else to go. Courage is not absence of fear, Pahayuko said. It is choosing to do right thing even when you are afraid. You were afraid in Fort Griffin, but you helped us anyway. You are afraid here, but you stay anyway. This is courage, whether you name it or not. 2 weeks passed, and Louise began to feel something she hadn't felt since before the fire. Useful, needed, like her presence mattered. The women still kept their distance, but they no longer glared at her with open hostility. Red Buffalo still watched her with suspicion, but he no longer spoke against her presence in council. Nadua became something like a friend, teaching Louise not just language, but the deeper rhythms of Comanche life. how to read weather signs in the sky, how to identify edible plants, how to move quietly through tall grass. One afternoon, while they worked on scraping a hide, Nadua told Louise her own story. I was Cynthia Ann Parker before I was Nadua, she said, her hands moving steadily across the stretched deerskin. My family was killed in a raid when I was 9. I was taken, I screamed and fought for weeks, tried to escape twice, but slowly I began to understand that the people who took me were not monsters. They were just people who had lost their own children to white violence, who were trying to survive. Do you ever want to go back? Louise asked. Go back to what? Nadua replied. I have lived more years as Comanche than I lived as white. I have had husband and children here. This is my home now. My people tried to rescue me once. Soldiers came and took me by force back to Texas. I was miserable. I tried to escape, to return here. They watched me too closely. When I heard my Comanche family thought I was dead. Something in me died too. Louise worked in silence for a while. Processing this, finally she said, I don't know if I belong anywhere anymore. Belonging is not about blood, Nadua said. It is about who sees you when you are broken and helps you stand. It is about who you would protect, even if it cost you everything. That night, Louise lay awake in the lodge, listening to the camp settle into sleep. She thought about Fort Griffin, about the life she'd left behind, about her dead husband who had never really seen her, about her dead son who she'd never really known, about the town that had decided she was cursed and made sure she believed it. Here in this camp of people who should have been her enemies, she felt more alive than she had in years. She fed Kimimela and watched her grow. She learned new words and new ways of seeing the world. She sat by fires and listened to stories in a language she barely understood but felt in her bones. Bahayuko found her the next morning sitting alone near the creek where the camp got its water. He approached quietly and sat beside her on the grass, not speaking at first, just present. Kimimela is awake. He finally said, She cries for you. Louise smiled despite herself. She has good lungs now, that's certain. Because of you, Bahayuko said, turning to look at her directly. In my culture, when someone saves a life, they become responsible for that life. Connected to it, you are connected to my daughter now. You are part of her story forever. And what does that make us? Louise asked. Meeting his eyes, family, Bahayuko said simply. Maybe not the family either of us expected, but family nonetheless. A shout from the camp interrupted them, urgent and alarmed. Both jumped to their feet and ran back toward the lodges. Warriors were gathering near the eastern edge of camp, pointing toward the horizon where a dust cloud rose. Riders coming fast. Soldiers! Red Buffalo shouted, his face twisted with rage. At least 20. The white woman's people come for her. I didn't. Louise started to protest, but Bahayuko cut her off. I know, he said firmly. This is not you. Tabananika emerged from his lodge already armed, his face grim. We cannot fight so many, not with women and children here. We must move camp now. Leave before they arrive. The camp exploded into controlled chaos. Women rushing to take down lodges, men gathering horses, children being lifted onto travois packed with supplies. Louise stood frozen, watching the destruction of the fragile peace she'd found, watching the fear her presence had brought. Come, Nadua grabbed her arm, help me pack. We have perhaps 1 hour before they arrive. Louise worked alongside the women, her hands moving automatically while her mind raced. This was her fault. Fort Griffin had sent soldiers to find her, to punish the Comanche for harboring her. People would die because she'd tried to save a baby. When the camp was packed and ready to move, Tabananika rode to where Louise stood beside Bahayuko. His face was hard but not cruel. You have brought trouble as Red Buffalo predicted, he said. But Nadua tells me you worked like one of us to prepare for flight. This shows character. Let me go to them, Louise said suddenly, the words tumbling out. Let me ride out to meet them. Tell them I'm here by choice, that you didn't take me. Maybe they'll leave you alone. They will not believe you, Tabananika said. They will think we forced you to speak. They will attack anyway because that is what soldiers do. Then let me try, Louise insisted. What's the worst that happens? They take me back to Fort Griffin. At least your people will be safe. Pahayuko's hand closed on her arm. No, he said flatly. You are not going back to people who tried to hurt you, who would have let my daughter die. Your daughter is alive, Louise said. Looking at Kimimela bundled on his back, she's strong enough now to survive on water and soft foods. You don't need me anymore. I can go. I should go. The baby is not why you stay, Pahayuko said, his eyes intense on hers. You stay because here you are seen, here you are valued, here you are family. Red Buffalo rode up on his warhorse, his face dark with fury. This is foolish talk, he spat. The woman wants to leave. Let her go. Let her bring soldiers down on empty camp while we ride to safety. She is under my protection, Pahayuko said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. Anyone who touches her answers to me. The two warriors stared at each other, the air between them crackling with tension. Finally, Red Buffalo spat in the dust and rode away. But the look he gave Louise promised this wasn't over. We ride now, Tabananika ordered. North toward the canyon country where soldiers will not follow easily. Louise Carter, you ride with Pahayuko. Stay close. Do not fall behind. The band moved out as thunder rumbled in the distance. Or maybe it was hoofbeats. Louise couldn't tell. She rode behind Pahayuko with Kimimela bundled between them, looking back toward the dust cloud that marked the approaching cavalry. She'd thought leaving Fort Griffin would be an ending, but now she understood it had only been a beginning. She was caught between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. She was a white woman in a Comanche camp, with soldiers coming to drag her back to a town that wanted to punish her. She was a mother without a child, nursing a baby who wasn't hers. She was a widow who felt more alive than she had when her husband was breathing. What have I done? She whispered, more to herself than to Pahayuko. You have chosen life, he replied, his voice carrying back to her over the sound of horses and travois. Now we run so you can keep living it. They rode hard into the afternoon, the soldiers following but not gaining ground. The Comanche knew this land in a way the cavalry never could, knew every creek and canyon and hidden trail. As the sun began to set, they reached rough country where horses had to pick their way carefully over stone. Behind them, the dust cloud had stopped growing, the soldiers giving up or making camp or deciding the chase wasn't worth the risk. Louise allowed herself to breathe for the first time in hours, allowed herself to believe they might actually escape. That night they camped without lodges, just bedrolls under the stars, fires kept small and carefully hidden. Louise nursed Kimimela, while Pahayuko stood watch nearby, his bow strung and ready. Thank you, Louise said quietly, for protecting me today, for not letting them take me. You are one of us now, Pahayuko said, turning to look at her in the firelight. Whether you believe it or not, whether anyone else believes it, you are family, and I protect my family. Louise looked at this man who had burst into her life carrying a dying baby and turned everything upside down. This man who saw past her scars to something worth protecting. This man who had given her a purpose when she'd forgotten she needed one. I believe it, she said, and realized with surprise that it was true. 3 weeks in the canyon country changed Louise in ways she couldn't have predicted. Her hands grew calloused from working hides and grinding corn. Her skin darkened from constant sun. Her Comanche improved enough that she could hold simple conversations without Nadua translating every word. She was becoming something new, something that belonged neither to her old life nor fully to this one, something in between. Kimimela thrived beyond anyone's expectations. She doubled in size and could now go several hours between feedings. Her laugh was loud and frequent, her grip strong enough to pull Louise's hair when she leaned too close. Pahayuko watched his daughter's transformation with wonder that never seemed to fade. But Louise noticed how he also watched her, his eyes following her movements around camp with an intensity that made her heart race. Red Buffalo's hostility had only deepened with time. He made his displeasure known at every council meeting, argued that keeping a white woman endangered them all, that soldiers would keep searching, that Louise's presence was a constant threat. Tabananica listened but always came to the same conclusion. She stays until she chooses to leave. We do not abandon those under our protection. One afternoon, while Louise was helping the women dig for wild onions in a meadow near camp, a young warrior came racing back on his horse, his face urgent with news. "Soldiers," he shouted in Comanche. "After his ride south, they have Indian scouts with them. They are following our trail." The camp mobilized immediately. Women gathering children and supplies, men preparing weapons and horses, but this time felt different. This time, there was nowhere left to run. The canyon country had only so many hiding places, and the soldiers clearly had guides who knew the land. "This is because of you." Red Buffalo confronted Louise directly for the first time. His English rough but understandable. "Your people will not stop hunting you. They will follow us until we are all dead. You must leave." "I'll go," Louise said immediately, her stomach knotting with fear, but her mind clear. "I'll ride south to meet them. Tell them to leave you alone." Pahayuko appeared at her side as if summoned, his face set in hard lines. "No one is going anywhere. We fight if we must, we run if we can, but we do not sacrifice our own to appease soldiers." "I'm not your own," Red Buffalo spat. "She is white. She will always be white. Keeping her will get us all killed." "Then you can leave," Pahayuko said coldly, his hand moving to his knife. "Take your family and go if you are so frightened." "But Louise stays." The two warriors faced each other with murder in their eyes. The whole camp had stopped to watch, waiting to see if blood would be spilled over the white woman who had brought nothing but trouble. Tabananica pushed between them with surprising strength for his age. "Enough," the elder commanded, his voice cutting through the tension. "Fighting each other serves only the bluecoats. Red Buffalo, take 10 warriors and scout the soldiers' position. See how many. See how they move, Pahayuko. You stay here and prepare defenses in case they find us." Red Buffalo glared at Louise one more time before mounting his horse and riding out with his chosen men. The silence that followed was thick and uncomfortable. Louise felt every eye on her, felt the weight of their fear and resentment. She was poison to these people, a curse that brought death to everything she touched. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay in Nadua's lodge, listening to the older woman's steady breathing, and thought about all the ways she'd failed. Her husband dead because she wasn't home. Her son dead because her body had been damaged. Fort Griffin turned against her because she'd shown mercy. Now this camp in danger because she couldn't let go. She rose quietly and slipped out of the lodge. The camp was dark except for the watchfires where warriors stood guard. She walked to where the horses were picketed and found Pahayuko already there, checking saddles and weapons in the moonlight. "You should be sleeping," he said without turning around. "Tomorrow will be hard. I can't sleep knowing people might die because of me," Louise replied, moving to stand beside him. "People might die because soldiers hunt us," Pahayuko corrected. "Because white men want our land and will kill to take it. You did not create this war. You are just caught in it like we are." "Red Buffalo is right, though," Louise said quietly. "I should leave. Go back to Fort Griffin. Face whatever punishment they have waiting." Pahayuko finally turned to face her, his expression fierce in the shadows. "You think they will punish you and then let you live? You think they will not hang you for helping Indians, for living among us, for nursing a Comanche baby?" Louise hadn't let herself think that far ahead. She'd assumed jail maybe, public shaming certainly. "But hanging, I helped a child," she whispered. "Surely that's not a hanging offense." "You lived with a Comanche warrior," Pahayuko said bluntly. "In their eyes, that makes you traitor, that makes you worse than enemy. They will make example of you to show other whites what happens when you choose us over them." The truth of his words settled over Louise like a shroud. She was trapped. Going back meant death. Staying meant bringing death to others. There was no good choice, no path that didn't end in blood. "What do I do?" she asked, her voice breaking. "You survive," Pahayuko said, stepping closer, his hand coming up to cup her scarred cheek with surprising gentleness. "You keep living, keep fighting, keep choosing each day to be here with us, with me." The last two words hung in the air between them, charged with meaning neither had spoken aloud before. Louise's breath caught in her throat, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Pahayuko," she started to say, but he cut her off. "I know you lost husband," he said, his thumb tracing the line of her scar. "I know you grieve. I know it has not been long enough. But I need you to know that when I look at you, I see future, not just for my daughter, but for me. I see woman who is brave and kind and stronger than she believes." "I'm not strong," Louise protested. "I'm terrified all the time." "Being terrified and staying anyway is strength," Pahayuko said. "Running away would be easy. Giving up would be easy. You do neither. You stay and help and work and become part of us, even though it would be safer to leave." He leaned closer, his forehead nearly touching hers. "When this is over, when soldiers stop hunting us, I want you to stay, not because you have nowhere else to go, but because you want to be here with my daughter, with me as my wife, if you would consider such a thing." Louise's eyes widened with shock. "You want to marry me, a white woman? A widow with scars and grief and nothing to offer?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. "You offer everything," Pahayuko said simply. "You gave my daughter life. You gave me hope. You work harder than most warriors I know. You learn our ways without complaint. You belong here more than you ever belonged with your own people." Before Louise could respond, shouts erupted from the south edge of camp. Red Buffalo and his scouts came thundering back, their horses lathered with sweat, their faces grim with news that couldn't be good. The council gathered immediately, warriors and elders forming a circle, while the rest of camp pressed close to hear. Red Buffalo stood in the center, his chest heaving from the hard ride. 40 soldiers, he reported, twice what we thought. They have Tonkawa scouts who know this country. They are one day behind us and closing fast. They do not seem interested in capturing anyone. The colonel carries orders to exterminate any Comanche found off reservation. The word exterminate fell like a stone into still water, ripples of fear spreading through the gathered people. Women pulled their children closer, men gripped their weapons tighter. This was not a chase anymore, this was an execution. "We cannot fight 40 soldiers," Tabananika said heavily. "Even with our best warriors, we are too few. And we have women and children who cannot fight." "Then we run again," someone suggested. "Push deeper into the canyons where horses cannot follow. The Tonkawa will track us on foot if necessary." Red Buffalo said, shaking his head. "They are paid in Comanche scalps. They will not stop until we are dead, or they are—" Louise felt the weight of every eye turning toward her. Even before Red Buffalo spoke the words, everyone was thinking. "Give them the white woman," he said, his voice hard. "Ride under white flag. Tell them we found her wandering. Give her back and maybe they leave us in peace." "She is not ours to give," Pahayuko said immediately, stepping into the circle, his voice dangerous. "She is under my protection, under this band's protection. We do not trade lives for safety, even when keeping her means all our deaths." Red Buffalo challenged. "Your pride will kill your own daughter." "Warrior, think about that. I think about nothing else." Pahayuko shot back, his hand on his knife. "But I will not buy my daughter's life with Louise's death. I will not become the kind of man who sacrifices the innocent." "She is not innocent," Red Buffalo roared. "She is white. Her people do this. Her people hunt us. Her people want us dead. And she chose us over them." Nadua spoke up from where she stood at the circle's edge, her voice cutting through the anger. "She risked everything to feed a baby when her own people would have let that baby die. She stayed when she could have run. She works and learns and tries to belong. Is that not worth something?" "It is worth nothing if we are all dead," Red Buffalo said. But some of the fury had left his voice, replaced by exhaustion and fear. Tabananika raised his hand for silence, his old face carved with difficult decisions. Louise Carter stepped forward. Louise moved into the circle on shaking legs, aware of Pahayuko tensing beside her, ready to fight if the council decided against her. "You have brought trouble to us," Tabananika said, his eyes kind but firm. "Not by intent but by circumstance. Soldiers hunt you, hunt us for harboring you. People I am sworn to protect are in danger because you are here." Louise nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. But the elder continued, "You have also brought life to us. Kimimela lives because of you. Our band is stronger with one more healthy child. You work without complaint, you learn our ways, you try to belong. These things matter too." He paused, looking around the circle at his people. "I will not give you to the soldiers like Red Buffalo suggests. We are not the kind of people who trade lives. But I will ask you, what would you have us do? The choice must be partly yours, since it is your life we discuss." Louise took a shaking breath, feeling the weight of everyone's survival resting on her shoulders. "I'll go to them," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Not as a prisoner you're handing over, but as a messenger. I'll tell them I chose to leave Fort Griffin, that no one forced me, that the Comanche have done nothing wrong." "They will not listen," Pahayuko said urgently. "They will take you and still hunt us." "Maybe," Louise agreed, "but maybe not. Maybe if they see I'm unharmed, if they hear from my own mouth that I'm here by choice, maybe they'll let you go. It's worth trying." "It is suicide," Pahayuko said flatly. "I will not allow it. It is not your decision," Louise said gently, turning to face him. "I'm grateful for your protection, for everything you've done. But I can't let children die because I'm afraid I won't be that person." The council argued for another hour, but Louise's mind was made up. Finally, Tabananica decreed that at dawn, Louise would ride out under white flag to meet the soldiers. Pahayuko would accompany her as far as safe, then return while she approached alone. That night, Louise held Kimimela for a long time, memorizing the baby's face, the weight of her in her arms, the sound of her breathing. This child had saved her in a way she was only beginning to understand, had given her purpose when she'd lost all reason to live. "Take care of your father," she whispered to the sleeping baby. "Be strong and brave, and remember that someone who looked nothing like you loved you enough to risk everything." Pahayuko stood in the doorway of Nadua's lodge. His silhouette dark against the moonlight, Louise handed Kimimela to Nadua and stood. Following Pahayuko out into the night without speaking, they walked to the edge of camp, where the canyon wall rose black and imposing, the stars overhead bright and cold and indifferent to human suffering. "I cannot let you do this," Pahayuko said, his voice raw with emotion barely contained. "I cannot watch another woman I love ride to her death." Louise's heart stuttered at the word love. "You said you wanted me to stay as your wife," she said quietly. "Was that true or just words to make me feel valued?" "It was true," Pahayuko said fiercely, taking her hands in his. "It is true. I want you as my wife. I want to wake beside you every morning. I want to watch you raise my daughter. I want to grow old with you." "Then remember me that way," Louise said, tears streaming down her face now. "Remember me as someone who stayed. Someone who chose you and Kimimela and this life over safety. Remember me as brave, even if I don't feel brave. You are the bravest person I know," Pahayuko said, pulling her against his chest, his arms wrapping around her like he could keep her safe through will alone. "Which is why I know I cannot stop you, why I know you will do this no matter what I say." They stood like that for a long time. Two people from different worlds who had found each other in grief and desperate need, who had built something fragile and precious and probably doomed. "If I survive this," Louise said into his chest, "if by some miracle the soldiers let me go and I can come back, will you still want me?" "I will want you until my last breath," Pahayuko said, his hand tangling in her hair. "And if you do not come back, if they take you from me, I will tell my daughter every day about the white woman with the scarred face who loved her enough to die for her." Louise pulled back just enough to look up at him, then rose on her toes and kissed him. It was her first kiss since her husband died. Her first kiss that felt like choice rather than duty. Pahayuko responded with gentle fierceness, his hands cradling her face like she was something precious and breakable. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Both knew it might be the last time. "Dawn comes soon," Pahayuko said roughly. "You should rest." "I can't sleep," Louise admitted. "Will you stay with me until morning?" He nodded and led her back to Nadua's lodge. They sat outside by the dying fire while the camp slept around them, not speaking, just being together. counting the hours until Louise would ride out to face soldiers who wanted her dead. When the sun finally crested the canyon rim, painting the stone walls gold and pink, Louise stood and straightened her dress. She'd washed her face and braided her hair, trying to look respectable, trying to look like someone worth listening to. Pahayuko brought 2 horses, his war pony and a gentler mare for Louise. The whole camp gathered to watch her leave, children clinging to their mothers, warriors standing with weapons ready in case this was a trap. Red Buffalo watching with an expression Louise couldn't read, maybe respect, maybe just satisfaction that the problem was being removed. Nadua embraced Louise hard, whispering in her ear, "You are stronger than you know, white daughter, come back to us." Tabananaka pressed something into Louise's hand. A small medicine bag on a leather cord. "This will protect you," he said. "Or if not protect, then at least remind you that you carry part of us with you always." Louise tied the bag around her neck, then took the white cloth Pahayuko handed her and tied it to a long stick. A flag of truce, a symbol of peaceful intent that soldiers might or might not honor. They rode out together, Pahayuko and Louise. The morning sun warm on their backs, the canyon country spreading endlessly in all directions. After an hour, they reached a high point where they could see the soldiers in the distance, a line of blue uniforms and dust moving steadily toward the camp. "This is where I leave you," Pahayuko said, his voice thick with unshed tears, his hand reaching out to touch her face one more time. "This is where you go back and keep Kimimela safe." Louise corrected, "That's all that matters." "She's all that matters." "You matter," Pahayuko said fiercely. "You matter to her, to me, to everyone in that camp, whether they admit it or not. Do not forget that when the soldiers tell you otherwise." Louise nodded, not trusting her voice. Then she turned her horse south toward the approaching cavalry, toward whatever fate awaited her. She didn't look back because if she did, she knew she'd lose her courage. She just rode forward with her white flag high, her heart pounding, her prayers silent and desperate. Behind her, Pahayuko sat on his horse, watching, until she was just a small figure in the distance. Then he turned and rode hard back to camp, back to his daughter, back to his people, carrying the image of Louise's scarred face and brave eyes like a wound that would never fully heal. The cavalry colonel was a hard man, with grey temples and eyes like winter ice. He sat his horse with rigid military bearing, while his 40 soldiers formed a line behind him. Rifles ready, faces hostile, Louise rode toward them with her white flag held high, her heart hammering so loud she thought they must hear it. "That's far enough," the colonel called out when she was still 50 yards away, his hand raised in warning. "State your name and business." "Louise Carter," she called back, her voice carrying across the dusty ground. "I'm the woman you're looking for. I came of my own accord to talk." The colonel's eyes narrowed. He conferred briefly with the lieutenant beside him, then gestured for Louise to approach alone. She rode forward slowly, very aware of the rifles tracking her movement, very aware that one wrong word could end with a bullet. "She's Mrs. Carter," the colonel said when she stopped 10 feet away, his tone formal and cold. "I am Colonel Henry Ashford. I've been tasked with recovering you from hostile Indians and bringing you back to Fort Griffin to face charges." "What charges?" Louise asked, though she suspected she knew. "Consorting with the enemy, aiding and abetting known hostiles, abandoning your people in time of conflict." The colonel recited like he was reading from a list. "Fort Griffin says you willingly left with a Comanche warrior, that you've been living in their camp, that you refused to return when given the chance." "I did refuse," Louise said clearly, "because 5 men from Fort Griffin broke into my room and tried to assault me. Because my own people decided I was cursed and made me invisible. Because I chose to help a dying baby when everyone else turned away." The colonel's expression didn't change. "Noble sentiments, perhaps, but the law is clear. You cannot aid enemy combatants regardless of your reasons. Now tell me where the Comanche camp is located, and come peacefully. We'll see that you get a fair trial." Louise knew what a fair trial meant in Fort Griffin. It meant a rope and a quick drop, and her body left swinging as a warning to others. She also knew that if she revealed the camp's location, these soldiers would attack regardless of what she said. Children would die, women would die, Kimimela would die. "I won't tell you where they are," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. "And there's nothing you can do to make me—" The colonel studied her for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he gestured to two soldiers. They rode forward and grabbed Louise's arms. Yanking her from her horse, she hit the ground hard, the breath knocked from her lungs. "Search the area," the colonel ordered. "She came from the north. The camp can't be more than a few hours away. Find their trail." Tonkawa scouts moved forward, reading the ground with experienced eyes. Louise's heart sank as she realized they'd find Pahayuko's tracks easily, would follow them straight back to the canyon. Everything she'd sacrificed would be for nothing. One of the scouts called out in broken English. Two horses came from that direction. One went back, fresh tracks, maybe 1 hour old. The colonel smiled grimly. "Tie her up and bring her," he ordered. "She'll watch what happens when you protect savages over your own kind." They bound Louise's hands with rough rope and threw her back on her horse, tied her feet to the stirrups so she couldn't jump off. Then the entire cavalry unit began moving north following Pahayuko's trail. Louise tried desperately to think of a way to warn the camp, to delay the soldiers, but she was helpless, dragged along toward the slaughter she'd tried to prevent. The sun climbed higher as they rode, the Tonkawa scouts following the trail with certainty. Louise prayed that Pahayuko had reached camp in time, that Tabananaka would see the dust cloud and run, that somehow they'd escape, but she knew the chances were slim. After 2 hours of hard riding, they reached the high point where she'd separated from Pahayuko. From here, the canyon country spread out below, a maze of stone and shadow. The scouts studied the ground, pointing and arguing in their own language. "Trail splits here," one of them reported to the colonel. "The horse went 3 directions." Very confusing, maybe tricks. Louise felt a surge of hope. Pahayuko had covered his tracks, had split the trail to buy time. The colonel's face darkened with frustration. "Search all 3 paths," he ordered. "Report back within the hour." While they waited, the soldiers made camp in the meager shade of a rocky overhang. Louise sat bound on the ground, ignored except for the guard assigned to watch her. She was desperately thirsty, her wrists raw from the rope, her face burning from the sun. But physical discomfort seemed distant compared to the fear consuming her. The guard was young, maybe 19, with a soft face that hadn't fully hardened into soldier's indifference. He glanced at Louise several times before finally speaking. "You really live with them?" he asked quietly, his curiosity overcoming his training. "I did," Louise said, her voice hoarse. "I helped nurse a baby who was dying. They say you're a traitor, that you chose Indians over whites." "I chose a baby over hate," Louise corrected. "I chose mercy over cruelty. If that makes me a traitor, then I'm guilty." The young soldier looked uncomfortable. "My sister had a baby last year," he said after a moment. "It was hard. The baby was sick. We thought we'd lose them both. I can't imagine just letting a baby die because of who its parents were. Most people can't imagine it until they're faced with the choice," Louise said. "Then they find reasons, they find justifications, they find ways to make cruelty feel righteous." Before the soldier could respond, the scouts returned, their faces frustrated. "Trails are false," one reported. "Rocks hide real path. Could take days to find actual camp." Colonel Ashford's jaw clenched with barely controlled rage. He stalked over to where Louise sat and hauled her to her feet by her bound arms, making her cry out in pain. "Tell me where they are," he demanded, his face inches from hers. "Tell me now, or I will make you wish you had—" "You'll kill them if I tell you," Louise said. "You'll kill the children, the women, everyone. They're hostiles," the colonel said coldly. "They're off reservation. They're fair game under my orders. Now tell me where they are, or you'll hang for treason." "Then I'll hang," Louise said, meeting his ice-blue eyes directly. "I won't help you murder children," the colonel backhanded her across the face, the force of it splitting her lip, sending her crashing back to the ground. Louise tasted blood, felt her scarred cheek burning, but she didn't make a sound. "Colonel," the young guard said hesitantly. "Sir, she's a civilian. We can't just—" "Shut your mouth, soldier," Ashford snapped. "This woman is a traitor, and she'll be treated as such. He turned back to Louise. "We'll find them eventually. These scouts are the best trackers in Texas. You're only delaying the inevitable and making it worse for yourself." "Then I'll delay it as long as I can," Louise said through her bleeding lip. The colonel stared at her with something like grudging respect mixed with contempt. Then he gestured to his men. "Break camp, we're moving north. We'll search every canyon until we find them." They rode for another hour, the Tonkawa scouts ranging ahead. Checking every possible path, Louise was beginning to hope they'd never find the trail when gunfire cracked through the canyon air. "Ambush!" someone screamed, and chaos erupted. Comanche warriors appeared on the canyon rim above them, maybe 15 men, led by Red Buffalo. They fired arrows and rifles down at the cavalry, their position giving them advantage. Soldiers scrambled for cover, horses screamed and bolted. The colonel shouted orders that were lost in the noise. Louise's horse panicked and reared. With her feet tied to the stirrups, she couldn't jump clear. She was thrown hard, her shoulder hitting rock with sickening force. Pain exploded through her body as the horse dragged her several feet before the reins caught on a bush. Through the dust and confusion, she saw Pahayuko appear on the rim, saw him notch an arrow and aim. But he wasn't aiming at soldiers. He was aiming at her guard, the young soldier who'd shown kindness. Louise screamed, but the arrow was already flying. It missed the soldier by inches, thudding into the ground beside him, but it served its purpose. The young man dropped his rifle and dove for cover. Pahayuko was already sliding down the canyon wall, moving with impossible speed toward where Louise lay, tangled with her panicked horse. Two soldiers tried to intercept him, but Red Buffalo and another warrior cut them off. The fight was close and brutal. Knives flashing, men grunting and struggling. Pahayuko reached Louise and cut her bonds with quick slashes of his blade. "Can you ride?" he asked urgently, pulling her to her feet. "My shoulder," Louise gasped. "I think it's broken." Pahayuko didn't hesitate. He lifted her onto his horse that had come sliding down the rocks behind him, then swung up behind her, his arm tight around her waist, holding her against his chest as he kicked the horse into motion. The Comanche warriors were already retreating. Having accomplished their goal of creating chaos and rescuing Louise, they disappeared into the maze of canyons like smoke. The cavalry tried to follow, but their horses were scattered, their formation broken. By the time the colonel restored order, the Comanche were gone. Pahayuko rode hard for 20 minutes before slowing, checking behind them constantly for pursuit. Louise sagged against him, pain making her dizzy, her shoulder screaming with every jarring step the horse took. "Almost there," Pahayuko said, his breath warm against her ear. "Nandua will set your shoulder. You will heal." "You came back," Louise said through gritted teeth. "You risked everyone to come back for me." "Did you think I would not?" Pahayuko replied, his arm tightening slightly around her waist. "You are mine to protect, mine to cherish. I do not abandon what is mine." The camp had moved deeper into the canyons, hidden in a place where walls rose on 3 sides and only one narrow path led in, easily defended, nearly impossible to find. When they arrived, the whole band rushed out to meet them. Nadua took charge immediately, ordering Louise carried into her lodge, feeling her shoulder with experienced hands. "This will hurt," she warned. Then, without waiting for Louise to brace herself, she pulled and twisted, popping the joint back into place. Louise screamed, the world going white with agony, then grey, then black. She woke hours later to find Kimimela sleeping beside her, the baby's small hand resting on Louise's good arm. Pahayuko sat on her other side, his face haggard with exhaustion and worry. "You should not have come for me," Louise said, her voice weak. "You put everyone at risk." "You put everyone at risk for my daughter," Pahayuko replied. "Did you think I would do less for you?" "That's different." Kimimela was innocent. "And you are not?" Pahayuko asked. "You who only ever tried to help, who only ever showed mercy. You think you deserve less protection than a baby." Louise had no answer to that. She'd spent so long believing she was cursed, marked, worthy only of suffering. The idea that someone would risk everything to save her felt impossible. The council met that night, and Louise was carried out to hear their decision. her shoulder bound tight, her body aching. Tabananica stood before the gathered people, his face grave. "The soldiers will not stop hunting us now," he said. "They know we are here. They will bring more men, more scouts. We cannot stay in this country." Then we go deeper into Comanche. Red Buffalo said back to the main bands, "There is safety in numbers." "Or we negotiate," another elder suggested. "Go to the reservation as the government demands. Stop fighting a war we cannot win." The debate raged for hours, voices rising and falling, anger and fear and exhaustion making everyone roar. Finally, Tabananica raised his hand for silence. "We will vote," he said. "Those who wish to go to the reservation, speak now." 5 families stepped forward, including some of the elders, exhausted from running. Louise felt a stab of guilt, knowing her presence had contributed to their decision. Those who wished to continue fighting, to go deeper into free territory, speak now. Red Buffalo stepped forward, along with most of the young warriors, their faces set with determination. "And those who are uncertain, who need time to decide, you may stay with my family until your hearts know the right path." The rest of the band remained where they were, caught between 2 impossible choices. Tabananica nodded. "Then we split. Those going to the reservation will leave at dawn. Those going deeper into Comanche leave the day after. My family stays here 1 more week to rest and heal before deciding." He looked at Louise. "And you, Louise Carter, you must choose. Do you go to the reservation and take your chances with white authority? Do you come deeper into Comanche and live fully as Comanche? Or do you leave us entirely and make your own path?" Louise looked at Pahayuko, at Kimimela sleeping against her chest, at Nadua, who had become like a mother, at the people who had protected her when they had every reason not to. "I choose to stay with Pahayuko," she said clearly. "Wherever he goes, I go. Whatever he decides, I follow. He and Kimimela are my family now." Pahayuko's face transformed with joy and relief. He took her hand carefully, mindful of her injured shoulder. "Then we go deeper into Comanche," he said. "We stay free as long as we can. We raise our daughter to know both her mother's people and yours. We build a life together." Red Buffalo stepped forward. "And I go with you," he said, surprising everyone. "I've been wrong about the white woman. She proved her loyalty, proved her courage. I will not speak against her again." He looked at Louise directly. "You are Comanche now in all ways that matter." "Welcome, sister." Louise felt tears streaming down her face. The acceptance she'd never thought to find. The belonging she'd stopped believing existed. Nadua embraced her carefully, mind the shoulder. She scolded through her own tears, "You are not healed enough for such emotion." The next days were filled with preparation and goodbyes. The families going to the reservation packed their belongings with heavy hearts, knowing they might never see the others again. The warriors going deeper into Comanche prepared for a life of constant movement, constant vigilance. Pahayuko came to Louise 3 days after the rescue. His face serious. "I have spoken with Tabananica," he said. "If you will still have me as husband, he will perform the ceremony tomorrow before we leave." Louise looked at this man who had burst into her life carrying a dying baby and changed everything, who had seen past her scars to something worth loving, who had risked death to save her. "I will have you," she said simply, "in whatever ceremony you wish, by whatever customs you follow. I am yours." The wedding was simple, performed at sunset with the whole remaining band as witnesses. Tabananica spoke words in Comanche that Louise barely understood, but felt in her bones. About partnership and strength, about 2 people becoming one family, about choosing each other every day even when the world made it difficult. Pahayuko placed a blanket around Louise's shoulders, the traditional gesture of a husband, claiming responsibility for his wife's well-being. Louise placed her hand over his heart, feeling it beat strong and steady, promising with her touch what words couldn't express. That night they lay together in Pahayuko's lodge, Louise's injured shoulder making intimacy careful and tender, Kimimela sleeping between them, the 3 of them a family at last. "We will have hard times ahead," Pahayuko said quietly, his hand gentle on Louise's hair. "The government will not stop hunting us. We will always be running, always hiding. I know, Louise said. But I've been running and hiding since the fire. At least now I'm running towards something instead of away. At least now I'm not alone. You will never be alone again, Pahayuko promised, his lips brushing her forehead. Whatever comes, we face it together. 6 months later, Louise rode through the deep canyons of Comanche with her daughter strapped to her back. Kimimela now called her mother in both English and Comanche. Learned both languages as she grew, Louise's belly was beginning to swell with new life. Pahayuko's child growing strong inside her. She'd learned to tan hides and make pemmican, learned to track game and read weather signs, learned to move camp quickly when danger threatened. Her scars had faded somewhat in the sun and wind, or maybe she just stopped noticing them. Stopped defining herself by what had been burned away. The soldiers still hunted them occasionally. The government still demanded they go to the reservation, but in the vast reaches of Comanche there were places to disappear, places to be free, places to build a life, even if that life was temporary and fragile. One evening as the sun set over the canyon walls, painting everything gold and red, Pahayuko found Louise sitting alone watching Kimimela play with the other children. "What are you thinking?" he asked, settling beside her. "That I was dead before I met you," Louise said. "Not physically, but in every way that mattered. I was a ghost haunting my own life, waiting for it to end. And now," Pahayuko prompted, "Pertu." "Now I'm alive," Louise said, turning to smile at him. "I have a husband who loves me, a daughter who needs me, another baby coming, a people who accept me. I have purpose and belonging and hope." She touched the medicine bag Tabananika had given her, still hanging around her neck. "I thought God had cursed me with these scars," she said softly. "But maybe they were just preparing me for this life, marking me so I would recognize Kimimela's need when I saw it, and leading me to you." Pahayuko took her hand, bringing it to his lips. "In my people's beliefs, scars are proof that you fought and survived. They are badges of honor, not shame. Your scars make you beautiful because they show your strength." Louise leaned against him, watching the sun disappear behind the canyon rim, listening to Kimimela's laughter mixing with the other children's voices, feeling the new life moving inside her. She'd lost everything once, her family, her home, her place in the world. But from those ashes, she'd built something new, something better, something that belonged to her in a way nothing ever had before. She was Louise Carter Pahayuko now, mother to Kimimela and to the child coming, wife to a warrior, member of a band, part of a people. She was home at last, not in a place but in a family, in a choice she made every morning to stay, to fight, to love, to belong. And that, she thought as Pahayuko's arm tightened around her and Kimimela came running to climb into her lap. That was worth every scar, every loss, every mile she'd run, because sometimes you have to lose everything to find what really matters. Sometimes you have to be broken to become whole. Sometimes the people who save you are the ones you never expected. And sometimes love finds you in the last place you thought to look, in the arms of a desperate father holding a dying baby, in a moment of mercy that changes everything, in a choice to help when the world says turn away. Louise had made that choice in a dusty trading post 5 months ago, and it had saved 3 lives, hers, Kimimela's and Pahayuko's. 3 broken people who found each other and became family. 3 lives woven together by milk and mercy and love that transcended every boundary the world tried to place between them. 2 years had passed since Louise Carter chose a new life over an old death, and the woman who now rode through the high plains country bore little resemblance to the timid widow who once sold bread in Fort Griffin's market. Her skin was deeply tanned, her hands calloused and strong, her hair worn in 2 braids wrapped with leather cord in the Comanche style. She carried a rifle across her back with the easy confidence of someone who knew how to use it, and strapped to her chest in a cradleboard decorated with intricate beadwork was her son, a sturdy 15-month-old boy named Samuel Pahayuko, called Little Sam by those who spoke English, and Tuka Mupitsi, which meant sleeping wolf by those who spoke Comanche. Louise had chosen to name him after her first son, the baby who never drew breath. Pahayuko had understood without her having to explain that this wasn't replacement, but remembrance, a way of honoring what was lost while celebrating what had been found. The boy had his father's dark eyes and strong jaw, but Louise's pale skin and the way his mouth curved when he smiled. Kimi Mela rode on her own pony now, nearly 3 years old and fearless, her black hair flying behind her as she raced ahead of the traveling band. She called Louise's mother in both languages without hesitation, had no memory of the desperate days when she'd been starving, knew only that the scarred white woman who fed her and held her and sang to her in a strange tongue was hers completely. The band had grown since that day 2 years ago, when they'd chosen to go deeper into Comancheria rather than surrender to reservation life. The families had joined them, warriors tired of the government's broken promises, women who refused to watch their children slowly starve on inadequate rations, elders who would rather die free than live caged. They numbered nearly 60 now, large enough to defend themselves, small enough to move quickly when soldiers came hunting, and soldiers still came, though less frequently than before. The army was spread thin across the frontier, fighting battles on multiple fronts. The Comanche had learned to read the patterns, to know when it was safe to hunt buffalo and when to disappear into the canyons. It was a hard life, constantly moving, never quite secure. But it was their life, chosen freely, lived on their own terms. Louise had become something of a legend among the scattered Comanche bands, the white woman who nursed a dying baby and stayed when she could have run, who married a warrior and bore his child, who could shoot and ride and work hides as well as any woman born to the tribe. Other bands came sometimes just to see her, to verify the stories were true. She always felt strange during these visits, being stared at and whispered about. But Pahayuko would put his hand on her back and remind her that legends were just truth told with admiration. Red Buffalo had become an unlikely ally, even something close to a friend. He taught Louise to shoot with real accuracy, showed her how to track game through grass without leaving sign, treated her son with the same rough affection he showed his own nephew. His hatred had transformed into respect, and respect had opened a door to trust. Nadua had stayed with their band, too old now for the constant moving that freedom required, but too stubborn to give up and go to the reservation. She'd become grandmother to the whole camp, the one who settled disputes and tended the sick and kept the old stories alive. She and Louise spent long evenings working hides together, talking in a mixture of English and Comanche about the strange paths that had led them both to this life. "You have lost your accent," Nadua observed one evening, her wrinkled hands steady on the scraping tool. "When you speak Comanche now, I forget you were not born to it." "I dream in Comanche sometimes," Louise admitted, "then wake confused about which language I should be thinking in. Sometimes I go whole days without speaking English." "This is good," Nadua said. "Language is not just words. It is way of seeing the world. You see like one of us now, think like one of us." "Do you ever miss being Cynthia Ann?" Louise asked, "the white girl you were before." Nadua was quiet for a long time, working her scraper in long practice strokes. Finally she said, "I miss her family sometimes. The ones who died. I wonder what life she would have lived if the raid never happened. But I do not wish to be her again. Nadua is who I am. This life is real. That one was just possibility that never came to be." Louise understood that completely. She rarely thought about her life in Fort Griffin anymore. When she did, it felt like remembering someone else's story, something that had happened to a different woman in a different time. The scared widow with the burned face who couldn't meet anyone's eyes seemed as foreign to her now as the Comanche had seemed then. Tabananica had died 6 months ago, peacefully in his sleep, after a long life of leading his people with wisdom and strength. Before he died, he'd taken Louise's hand and told her in careful English that she proved something important, that mercy was not weakness, that choosing to help the helpless made you strong, not foolish, that love could bridge any divide if people were brave enough to let it. His death had shaken the band. He'd been their anchor, their conscience, their connection to the old ways. Pahayuko and Red Buffalo now shared leadership responsibilities, making decisions together, arguing frequently, but always finding compromise. It was working so far. The band was thriving despite the constant pressure from soldiers and settlers. On this particular autumn morning, they were traveling to a gathering place where 3 bands would meet for trade and celebration. It happened twice a year when conditions allowed. A chance to exchange goods and news, to arrange marriages between bands, to let the children play together and remember they were part of something larger than their individual families. Louise was nervous. She'd been to smaller gatherings, but never one this large. Pahayuko assured her it would be fine, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd be judged, that despite 2 years of proving herself, there would be people who saw her white face and decided she didn't belong. "Your worry shows in your shoulders," Pahayuko observed, riding up beside her on his painted stallion. "They are tight like you prepare for battle." "I'm preparing for battle," Louise said, trying to smile. "Battle of judgment and whispers, and people deciding I'm not worthy." "Then they are fools," Pahayuko said simply, "and their opinions are worth nothing. You are my wife, mother of my children, member of our band. Anyone who questions this answers to me." "I don't want you to have to fight my battles," Louise protested. "Fighting for family is not burden," Pahayuko replied, his hand reaching out to touch her knee briefly. "It is honor you would fight for me." "For our children, I fight for you. This is balance." Little Sam chose that moment to wake up and begin fussing. Louise adjusted the cradle board and offered her breast. The baby latched and quieted immediately. Pahayuko watched them with an expression of such profound contentment that Louise felt her anxiety ease slightly. The gathering place was a broad meadow beside a clear running stream. Cottonwood trees providing shade, grass thick enough for the horse herd, stone fire rings marking where previous gatherings had been held. When Louise's band arrived, 2 others were already there. Lodges going up in organized chaos, children and dogs running everywhere, women calling to each other in greeting, men checking weapons and horses with the casual vigilance that never fully relaxed. Louise helped set up their lodge, working alongside the other women of her band. She was aware of curious glances from the other bands, aware of whispers, but she kept her head up and her hands busy, refusing to show the fear that twisted in her belly. That evening a feast was prepared, 3 cooking fires blazing, the smell of roasted buffalo and venison and prairie turnips filling the air. Louise sat with Pahayuko and their children, trying to enjoy the celebration despite the weight of watching eyes. A woman approached their fire, older, with grey streaking her braids and a face marked by smallpox scars. She stood before Louise until silence fell, everyone watching to see what would happen. "You are the white woman called Louise," the woman said in clear Comanche, "the one who nursed Pahayuko's daughter when she was dying." "I am," Louise replied in the same language, her heart pounding. "I am called Wekia." The woman continued, "I lost my daughter 3 winters ago to the spotted sickness. She was nursing a baby when she died. My grandson starved because I had no milk and no one to help. He died in my arms after 5 days. Louise's throat tightened with sympathy and grief. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "When I heard the story of you," Wekia continued, "how you helped enemy's child when your own people wanted her to die, I did not believe it. I thought it was lie. White woman's trick, but I see Kimmy Miller there, fit and healthy and laughing. I see your son at your breast. I see you are truly one of us now." The woman knelt before Louise, taking her hands in a grip that was fierce and warm. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "Thank you for being the person I wish had been there when my grandson needed help. Thank you for showing that mercy is possible even in this hard world." Louise's eyes filled with tears. "I only did what anyone should do," she managed to say. "But most do not," Wekia replied. "Most choose hate over help. Most choose judgment over mercy. You chose different. This makes you worthy of honor." She stood and called out to the gathered people in a loud, clear voice. "This woman is sister to all Comanche," she declared. "Anyone who treats her with disrespect disrespects me. Anyone who questions her place questions mine." Other women began to nod. Then voices rose in agreement. Louise sat stunned as acceptance washed over her. Real and tangible, Pahayuko's hand found hers and squeezed, his eyes shining with pride and vindication. The celebration continued late into the night. Stories told around the fires, songs sung in voices that carried across the meadow, children eventually falling asleep in piles like puppies, while adults talked and laughed and made plans. Louise held little Sam and watched Kimimela sleep, curled against Pahayuko's leg, feeling something close to perfect contentment. A commotion near the edge of camp drew everyone's attention, riders approaching fast. The warriors grabbed weapons and moved to intercept, but the riders called out in Comanche, friends, not enemies. They rode into the firelight, and Louise's breath caught. One of the riders was a white woman, younger than Louise, with tangled red hair and a face marked by recent bruising. She rode behind a Comanche warrior, her arms wrapped around his waist, her eyes wide and frightened in the firelight. "This is Margaret," the warrior said in halting English clearly for the white woman's benefit. "I found her 2 days ago near Settler Town. She was running from bad husband who beat her. I brought her here because I did not know what else to do. She has nowhere to go." Margaret's eyes swept the gathering until they landed on Louise, on her white face among all the brown ones, on her Comanche braids and beaded dress, and the baby at her breast. Hope and desperation flashed across the young woman's features. "Please," Margaret said, her voice raw and shaking. "They said there was a white woman here, who married into the tribe, who stayed and was safe. I didn't know where else to run. My husband said he'd kill me if I left, but I couldn't stay. I couldn't let him." Her voice broke, and she began to cry, harsh sobs that spoke of terror and pain and choices that had run out. Louise handed little Sam to Pahayuko and stood, crossing to where Margaret still sat on the horse. "Come down," Louise said gently, reaching up to help. "You're safe here. No one will hurt you." Margaret slid off the horse and nearly collapsed. Louise caught her and held her up, feeling how thin she was, how she shook with exhaustion and fear. She looked exactly like Louise had felt 2 years ago, broken and desperate and certain the world had no place for her. The gathered people watched in silence as Louise led Margaret to her fire, as she wrapped a blanket around the young woman's shoulders and offered her food and water. As she spoke quietly in English about safety and choices and the strange path that had led Louise here. "Can I stay?" Margaret finally asked, her voice small and afraid. "I don't know your ways. I don't speak the language, but I can work. I can learn. I just need somewhere my husband can't find me." Louise looked at Pahayuko, who nodded without hesitation, then at Nadua, who smiled with understanding, then at Wekea, who gestured welcome. "You can stay," Louise said, "and I'll teach you what I know. It's not an easy life. We're always moving, always hiding from soldiers, but you'll be free, you'll be safe, you'll be part of something." Margaret's tears came harder, but they were different now, relief mixing with the fear. "Thank you," she whispered. "And thank you." Louise remembered a desperate Comanche warrior bursting into a trading post with a dying baby, remembered making a choice that terrified her, remembered how that single moment of mercy had changed everything. Now she had a chance to be for Margaret what she'd been for Pahayuko, a hand reaching out when the world turned its back. The next morning, Louise woke to find Margaret asleep near her fire, curled in the blanket Louise had given her. Kimimela was already awake and playing with the other children, her laugh carrying across the camp. Little Sam was nursing contentedly, and Pahayuko was checking their horses, preparing for another day of the life they'd chosen. Nadua appeared at her elbow with a cup of sage tea. 3 white women now, she observed with a slight smile. "People will start to think we are recruiting. Maybe we are, Louise replied, taking the tea gratefully. Maybe that's not a bad thing. She watched Margaret sleep, seeing herself 2 years ago in every line of the young woman's battered face, seeing the fear and hope mixing together, seeing the possibility of transformation if someone was willing to guide the way. 2 years ago, Louise had been dying slowly in Fort Griffin, invisible and cursed and waiting for her life to end. She'd had nothing left to lose, nothing left to live for, nothing left to hope for. Then, a desperate father with a dying baby had given her a choice: mercy or judgment, help or hatred, life or slow death. She'd chosen mercy. She'd chosen life. And that choice had saved her in ways she was still discovering. Now she would help Margaret make the same choice, would teach her what Nadua had taught her, what the Comanche women had shown her through patience and inclusion, that belonging wasn't about blood or birth. It was about who you chose to be, who you chose to stand with, who you chose to love. Pahayuko returned from checking the horses and sat beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder, little Sam between them. Kimimela's laughter in the distance, the morning sun warm on their faces. "You're thinking deep thoughts," he observed. "I see it in your eyes." "I'm thinking about choices," Louise said, "about how one moment can change everything, about how helping one person can ripple outward in ways you never expect." "You helped my daughter and saved 3 lives," Pahayuko said. "Mine, hers, and yours. Now you help this Margaret and maybe save 3 more, hers, whoever she left behind who will be better without her husband's violence, and whoever she becomes in this new life." Louise leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady presence that had been her anchor through 2 years of transformation. "I was so scared that day in the trading post," she said. "When you asked me to help, I almost said no." "But you did not," Pahayuko replied. "You chose courage over fear, and look what it brought you." He gestured to the camp coming alive around them, to Kimimela racing past on her pony, to little Sam nursing peacefully, to Margaret sleeping safely under their protection, to the life they'd built from ashes and desperation and a dying baby's cry. "This is what mercy looks like," Louise said softly. "This is what happens when you choose help over hate." Pahayuko kissed her temple, his lips gentle on her scarred skin. "And this is only the beginning," he said. "Our children will grow up knowing both worlds, speaking both languages, understanding that people are just people regardless of what they look like." "Maybe that's how the fighting stops," Louise said. "Not with soldiers and treaties, but with children who grow up seeing beyond the divisions." "Maybe," Pahayuko agreed, "or maybe the fighting never stops. Maybe we just learn to build small pockets of peace in the middle of war, small families that choose love over hate." "I'll take it," Louise said. "Small pockets of peace are better than none at all." The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist. The 3 bands began preparing to separate again, to go their different directions across the vast plains, to continue living free for as long as they could. Louise packed their lodge with practiced efficiency, Margaret watching and learning, Nadua offering quiet guidance. Before they left, Ryes-Key came to say goodbye, pressing a small beaded pouch into Louise's hands. "For your next child," she said. "Whenever they come, this carries protection and blessing." "Thank you," Louise said, embracing the older woman, "for accepting me, for speaking up last night." "I spoke truth," Ryes-Key replied. "You are one of us in all the ways that matter. Never doubt this." As their band rode out, Louise looked back one last time at the gathering place, at the trampled grass and dying fires, at the other bands preparing to leave. She thought about how far she'd come from the invisible widow selling bread in Fort Griffin, about the woman she'd been and the woman she'd become. She thought about her first son, Samuel, buried in a tiny grave she'd never see again, about her dead husband whose name she rarely spoke anymore, about the life that had burned away in fire and grief. Those losses would always be part of her, would always ache in quiet moments, but they didn't define her anymore. They'd shaped her, prepared her, broken her open so something new could grow. Now she was Louise Pahayuko, mother to Kimimela and Samuel, and whoever came next, wife to a warrior, sister to a band, bridge between two worlds, legend to some, just another woman trying to survive to others. She was scarred and strong and still learning every day what it meant to belong. She was alive in a way she'd never been alive before. And that, she thought, as Pahayuko rode up beside her with little Sam in his cradleboard and Kimimela racing ahead on her pony, that was worth every sacrifice, every loss, every mile traveled. Because 2 years ago, a desperate father had taught her that mercy could save lives. And she'd learned that sometimes the people you save end up saving you right back. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.